I'm a project director at the Global Maritime Forum. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar. As you have just heard, it's worth knowing that this session is going to be recorded. It's also worth noting that while we've been having a number of presentations and discussions with panelists, you'll also have the chance to participate by submitting questions, which hopefully we'll have some time to address. You can do that directly in the chat. There's also a Q&A function, but the chat is fine. So please don't hesitate to share any thoughts or questions you have that way. Again, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar. Today we're going to be discussing some of the innovative activity related to zero-emission shipping that's going on around the world. We've all seen the big step forward that shipping took in July with the adoption of a new decarbonization strategy at MEPC 80. And I think that we are all very pleased and excited to see how that will be implemented in practice. But I think one thing that's worth noting is that all the innovation in decarbonized shipping, and particularly related to the future zero and near zero emission fuels, has become even more important now. It's absolutely essential that these efforts help bring these solutions to maturity and to market, so that when it's time to begin implementing this strategy in earnest, and the policies that will follow from the strategy begin to kick in, that we have a suite of technologies, solutions, and business models that are ready to go and start shipping on its journey to zero emissions. As I mentioned, I'm with the Global Maritime Forum. Among our decarbonization activities, we are the founders and hosts of the Getting to Zero Coalition. The partners of the GMF and the members of the Getting to Zero Coalition are many of the companies that are extremely active in this space of developing innovations for zero emission shipping, and really right across the value chain, both the existing maritime value chain and, as we'll see today, parts of what we assume will be the future maritime value chain in a decarbonized world. One of the things we try to do at the Global Maritime Forum and via the Getting to Zero Coalition is to enable and support this activity by sharing information about it, by shining a spotlight on some of the best and most interesting work, by sharing learnings that we can gather from across the sector globally. And one of the first ways we started to do that was by publishing a report called the Mapping of Zero-Emission Pilot and Demonstration Projects, something we've been doing for 3 years now. And we've actually produced 4 editions in 3 years, which can be a little confusing sometimes. But the 4th edition of that report will be the backdrop for today's webinar. I hope many of you have had a chance to see it. It was published earlier this spring, but we'll have a presentation of that report coming up shortly. Just looking at the findings at a high level, I very strongly recommend that you visit our website and download the full report if you're interested in it, because we won't have time to go into every detail today. But we will have a chance to take a deep dive into 3 of the projects that are featured in the report, which is very exciting. And again, these are projects that cover a significant chunk of the maritime value chain. Actually, we've got projects that are from the production side, and then we have also projects on the vessel side, and some fuel storage as well. Really exciting to have the guest speakers who are going to be presenting those projects, providing a little more detail and color that we're not able to include in the mapping report. And I will be introducing those speakers as we go along. First, though, I'd like to welcome my colleague, Anna Rosenberg. Anna works with us in our decarbonization work and has been personally involved in some of the projects that appear in the pilot mapping. Anna's been involved in the No Gaps project, which is developing a concept design and business model for a zero-emission gas carrier in the Nordic region. Also been a key person in our work on developing zero-emission shipping in dry bulk in Australasia. Aside from those efforts, Anna is the lead author of the 4th edition of the pilot mapping. And so I'd like to hand over to Anna to give you a high-level presentation of the findings of that pilot mapping. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jesse, for the very kind introduction. I'm going to share my screen and ask you all if you can see it properly.
We can, yeah.
And it still looks the same?
It
Full
does.
mode?
Looking good.
Perfect. Okay, so what is the mapping of zero-emission pilots and demonstration projects? Throughout the past year, me and my colleagues have been collected projects located across the globe that are all focused on developing zero-emission pathways for the maritime industry. And all of these projects either fall under the category of ship technology, fuel production, or bunkering infrastructure solutions. And what they all have in common is that none of these projects are yet available to the mass market. So they are either in a concept phase, in a laboratory phase, or are currently being tested in normal operations. So why are we doing this mapping? First of all, we want to showcase the industry action that is taking place globally to decarbonize shipping. We also want to build shared confidence in future zero-emission shipping solutions. We want to build awareness and understanding of the research and innovation that is currently underway. And we also want to create an opportunity to share learnings across projects and identify potential partners for future projects. As Jesse briefly mentioned, the mapping has been ongoing since 2020. Back then, we only had 66 projects, and we are now today at 373. So this is an increase, a huge increase in the amount of projects being pursued. And based on these projects, we are extracting some statistics and producing an annual report. And this year was the 4th edition, and it was published in May 2023. I think my colleague will share the link in the chat. We are gathering these projects by doing some desk research and reaching out to the Global Maritime Forum Getting to Zero Coalition's community. And while we cannot claim an exhaustive list, that we offer an exhaustive list of projects in this mapping, we are positive that we cover a majority of the projects publicly available worldwide. So diving into some of the highlights from this year's edition. Since last year, since the 3rd edition of this project, we have 170 new product additions. Among these, 121 were announced since last year's publication, which points at increased industry activity since this was a way bigger number than the year before. Projects continue to see global spread. The most active regions are Europe, Asia, and North America, with Norway, Japan, and UK in the lead. But each year we also see some new geographies popping up. So some examples of these are Egypt, South Africa, Thailand, and Malaysia. And all of these are actually focused on fuel production projects, and we will hear more from one of these projects later today. Another highlight from this year's edition is that apart from having a large share of projects being announced each year, we can also see that the projects that already exist are actually moving forward. So they are progressing in different ways. We have looked at progression in terms of new partnership agreements, accelerating or advancing to a new phase, receiving new funding, or for instance, getting a concept approved. And one of the most prominent developments that we saw this year, which I'm sure all of you have also seen in media, is that there has been an increase in the amount of approval in principles for ship technology projects in the past year. So we found over 30 AIPs in 2022 and 2023. A majority of these were focused on ammonia. And this increase brings zero-emission shipping closer to actually being tested in water, as this proves a kind of a first technological viability of these concepts, which is really exciting for the industry. We also see continued high presence of value chain collaboration. This remains high. I think last year we had 84% of all projects involving at least 2 value chain representatives, and we are now at 87. So as mentioned, it remains high. To the right, we can see which of the different value chain segments that are most active in these projects. We know that, for instance, bunkering projects are usually involving more than 2 value chain representatives. Around 22% of projects involve more than 4 value chain representatives. And some other interesting things that we see is that we continue to see low involvement of demand-side actors. It could be that these actors become more involved at a later stage in the projects or when the projects become more mature. But we do also see benefit in actually involving these from an early stage to hear some other perspectives in the decision-making for zero-emission pilots and demonstration projects. Another highlight is that we looked at international industry collaboration. So to get a sense of the flow of resources and ideas and expertise that is being shared across borders. This year, we saw that 70% of projects involve partners from at least 2 countries. And we determined this based on the location where each of the project partners involved in each of the projects are located. We could see that Norway, Germany, UK, US, and Japan are most frequently represented in projects with international industry collaboration. And that in general, ship technology projects focus on, or have a lot of partners that are closer, have closer proximity to each other, while for bunkering infrastructure projects, the spread is more widespread across the globe. And we could also see a trend this year where we looked at the global North-South collaboration on fuel production projects. And this is also one of the projects we will hear from later today. And if it wasn't clear in the beginning, this was the first time we looked at international industry collaboration to reflect the global nature of the industry. We also looked at fuel focuses, and just like last year, but even more prominent this year, hydrogen and ammonia are still the top 2 fuel focuses across all product categories, and methanol and battery have seen a relative decrease. Looking at specifically at ship technology projects, we can see that ammonia is the dominant fuel focus for larger ship types, followed by hydrogen and methanol. When we look at methanol this year, we can see that this fuel has seen a relative decrease, or not decrease, but it hasn't really expanded significantly since the 3rd edition compared to the other fuels. And this development is very much in line with the industry's market trends that we're all seeing. As an example, in July, orders for methanol fuel vessels totaled 204, with 27 in operation and 177 on order. So these developments suggest that methanol is moving into commercialization with less research and innovation needed to establish its role as a zero-emission fuel. And we can also see that when it comes to methanol, more of these products are focusing on less mature technologies, or for instance, conversion kits, which is also one of the products we will hear from later in this webinar. Looking at bunkering technology, onshore bunkering is still the largest category. We've seen an increased number of bunkering feasibility studies, many of which take a broad value chain perspective that includes both production, storage, transport, and bunkering. We see that bunkering vessels have become more common or more interesting to look at among pilots and demonstration projects. In 2022 and 2023, 7 of the bunkering vessels focused on ammonia and 4 on methanol, and they were located across Europe, Asia, and North America. We also saw some new offshore technologies, including zero-emission multi-fuel stations, offshore charging demonstrator, and an ammonia floating storage and regasification barge, just as a few examples of the bunkering technologies that we saw this year. And lastly, we also looked at public funding. This digit, or this percentage, remains also very similar to last year. So 40% or almost 40% of registered zero-emission pilots and demonstration projects state that they receive public funding. So this is something that they've publicly mentioned when announcing a new project. And of these, around 80% are found in Europe. And what we've seen is that since the first edition of the study back in 2020, Europe has shown continued support for research and innovation of zero-emission shipping through both regional and national funding programs and direct government aid. And the region now represents 110 publicly funded projects, which is double the amount than what it was back in 2020. And we can see that the other regions have much less public funding announced, but it is also important to note that data on public funding only includes direct awards of public funding. So this may especially impact regions with higher state involvement in ownership structures, for instance, and transparency in public funding, and also lack of information or availability of data may also impact these results. But what we found publicly announced is that around 40% of projects are publicly funded. So with these findings in mind, we continue to see collaboration, which we find very important at an early innovation stage. And we can also see that some concepts are moving out of the scope of the mapping. So both methanol moving into commercialization, some fuel production projects reaching investment decisions and also moving towards commercialization. And going forward, it is likely that we will see even more technologies, hopefully moving into a new stage and eventually commercialize. And we also predict, or we think that it is also likely that some of these pilot and demonstration products in the future will focus more on developing affordable and robust variations of concepts that already exists. But we are very excited to see what the future holds. I think that was all for me. Thank you very much for listening. And the product database is accessible at NextGen's website. I think my colleague will also link this in the chat, so you're very welcome to take a look at the products there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anna. That was a great run through of a very rich report, and one that keeps getting richer each year. It's virtually bursting at the seams with projects right now. Maybe before I let you go, I just wanted to call attention to a comment in the chat from Bill Adele about ammonia overtaking methanol. I think you addressed this in your final comments, actually, but maybe you could provide your view on that issue one more time, just for clarification's sake.
Yes, happy to. So the zero-emission pilots and demonstration projects are focusing on early stage innovation projects. So methanol not being as present in this project anymore is not because it's not relevant as a shipping fuel, it's because it has reached stages that are actually outside the scope of the mapping. So it has already starting to commercialize. We can see cargo containers coming, for instance, to Copenhagen in a few weeks, going on methanol or running on methanol. So it's more that it has reached, it's outside the scope of the mapping. It is still a super important, relevant zero-emission shipping fuel, but it is not anymore, it doesn't count as much anymore as a pilot and demonstration project, more at lower technological readiness levels.
Thanks, Anna. And of course, we will, there's still significant innovation going on, and we'll hear from one of those innovations from our third speaker today. It's going to be looking at the methanol fuel pathway. I also just want, I think we can address quickly Ratna's question about no projects identified in the Australia-New Zealand region. I assume the answer is that's correct. They're included in the Oceania category. Because I know that there are some projects in that region. So yes, that's correct. This is not a...
Yes, sorry. Yeah, I was nodding. Yes, it's correct.
and Ratna, if you download the report, or actually maybe the best way to approach that question is to visit the NextGen website. The link has just been posted. That website is actually a map. So your entry point into finding out more detail about each individual project is to click on a region, and you'll find a link to each project based on where it exists in the world. I encourage you to go dig in there if you're interested in geographically specific projects. I think we'll pause with the questions for Anna now. We may come back to them at the end. We're going to have 3 guest speakers on 3 different projects now, and we will actually take all the questions for those speakers after all 3 are done, because we want to make sure everyone has a chance to present their project. And I'd like to begin with Craig Ralston. He's a senior project engineer with BW Offshore. BW Offshore engineers innovative floating production solutions related to the future of energy and the energy transition. And this is exactly the area where Craig works, as I understand. Craig is going to be presenting a project that was included in the pilot mapping study that is about a floating ammonia production and storage unit. I'm not going to introduce the project. I'm going to let Craig do that because he knows it much better than I do. Craig, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jesse. I think there are some slides that will come on the screen in a second. Yeah, so I'm representing BW Offshore today to talk about our ammonia development. There are lots of areas of interest for us, but this is where we will talk today based on the mapping of the project. So I'll give a brief introduction to the company and then a small overview of the project. So we are traditionally working with FPSOs, which are floating hydrocarbon producers. They're ship-shaped. We specialize in the engineering, construction, and the operation of the assets. So we've worked for over 4 decades and completed 40 and plus projects. Currently, our fleet size is reducing. It's at 8 assets now. and we have a global presence. The backlog of $6 billion in the project pipeline. So we can go to the next slide. So the outlook for the company, just to give a brief background of why we're doing what we're doing and why we're here talking about what we're talking today, is that in the short term, we want to maximize the value of our existing fleet. So we are using the most life and the best efficiency that we can from the existing producers. And then we will divest the fleet as the time is going on. So we were before, I think, almost 20 assets in operation, and we're down to 8, like I said. In the medium term, we will then refill that gap with newer, more efficient projects, whether it's in the energy transition landscape or high efficiency second generation FPSOs in our core competencies. And in the long term, we want to expand into low carbon floating energy infrastructures. So this is also mirrored by our recent investment in a company called Ideal, which is now listed as BW Ideal, where we are producing floating wind foundations, which can be utilized in the offshore environment. In the projects that we look at in my team, the new ventures, we're focusing on a few key areas of the energy transition that we think reflect well on our experience. This first key area is carbon capture. So we are looking to implement carbon capture on our hydrocarbon producers. We are looking to also provide value chains for carbon injection and transport projects. We're also looking at this gas to power and FLNG. Gas to power here being opportunity to produce baseload power for the electrification of existing assets and grids, where we can use our experience with gas turbines and power generation combined with carbon capture to supply low carbon energy to the network. And then finally, where we're talking here today is with clean fuels. So that's really targeting the production of hydrogen, ammonia, and methanol, which was touched on before. Although the project today will focus highly on ammonia, mostly because we see that with our background, the ability to produce on the asset and store the fuel or the product is something that we have a lot of experience with, and we see that hydrogen is potentially something that will be more of a local commodity that's better utilized in a pipeline for distribution. We can go to the next slide. So yeah, we are part of the BW group. This is a group that have, amongst many things, it has almost 500 vessels in the fleet, including the world's largest gas fleet. And we have some of the project partners are the group partners that are involved in many interesting projects. I think we mentioned the No Gaps project before, which Epicosan are also part of, which is very interesting. So we are, as a group, we are well positioned to provide a lot of interesting inputs going forward, I feel. And this group has traditionally worked with shipping of production of hydrocarbons, chemicals, and gas products, which is sitting us in a good position for this energy transition out with oil and gas as the world goes forward. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. So I won't explain too much on our views on the ammonia market. I think that's well covered in the report from GMF. We are seeing that the demand for hydrogen, clean hydrogen, is growing. We feel that the ammonia will be a preferred carrier for this hydrogen over long distances, which will be via ships. So this is a very close link to the maritime sector. The other area of growth in ammonia is, of course, with the marine bunkering, which is again linked to the ocean. This top part of the slide that we see is highlighting that there are many reports out there now that are pointing to the fact that the traditional production methodologies for ammonia are going to change slightly. in the extreme long term, it will be a kind of renewable rich country that can export. In the midterm, we can onboard of blue projects, and there is still some hydrocarbon requirements there. And then this will lead to less local production and local use and more cross-boundary shipments of ammonia. And then in line with that, there will also be bunkering at the seaside. This map on the right-hand side is showing a study that was done by University of Cologne for basically highlighting the import options for ammonia. And this is, for me, a good highlight of the fact that the cost effectiveness of local production is not always in line with that, what you can get from global production and import routes. So this drive for clean ammonia and hydrogen as a carrier brings us towards our value proposition with the floating project. We need to be near a natural gas or renewable energy sources, which we see is possible with the floating project. We need a water supply to feed into the system. And then also going forward, there will need to be a growth in infrastructure on the onshore side. So that will require additional terminals for the storage and offloading of the ammonia to vessels for export or bunkering. And we see that a floating producer would provide that next step in the chain, all in one package. So we would bring proximity to the resources we need and also provide storage and offloading facilities for the projects that are going to take place to increase the global supply and shipping transport in the maritime network. Next slide, thank you. So floating versus onshore, I think this is a good question. Of course, there wasn't like many parts of the energy transition. There is not one solution to the problem. There are many approaches that will be required. We see that this value proposition that we have with the floating unit will give many benefits and allow us to increase the global production capacity of ammonia and onboard projects quickly. Based on our experience with offshore floating projects, then we see that there is some synergies that can be brought across with controlled construction environments. There's flexibility in the assets in terms of their scalability and location risk. And we see that we can offer some additional commercial models that maybe aren't typical in the onshore environment, which can help project developers push forward with their main focus on the energy side, where we can kind of handle the additional elements of the production side for the ammonia. Just to highlight, BW LNG are currently working on, I think we have a fleet of 5 FSRUs, which are proving the validity of a floating infrastructure. They are basically importing natural gas and regasifying it for use onshore. We see that there is an opportunity to provide this similar value chain in the reverse order, where the energy from onshore is turned into ammonia gas and liquefied and then exported. So there are many parallels ongoing with the existing projects here. We can go to the next slide. So our approach, we're talking today about the project offset. It's based on offshore production from fixed bottom wind in the North Sea. The Dutch sector is the kind of target area. We're looking to engineer solutions where we can build competence over a range of the parts of the vessel, which can then be kind of swapped in and out in a modular process design to allow us to adapt for any future projects that are coming along. So in our typical FPSO applications, we are filling the top side or the main deck of a ship with modules which are set for specific requirements. And we see that this is something that can be similarly done here, where depending on the needs of a project, if we have the core elements designed early, then we can quickly modify the configuration to meet the needs of any projects going forward. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so these slides are just a quick highlight of that modularity that we try to target here. So this is a high-level process flow for our green project, where we're having power in. The power is then put through the electrolyzers with water treatment and getting out the green hydrogen, which is then synthesized with nitrogen to produce the ammonia, which is stored and then offloaded from the vessel itself without ever having to go to shore. And then in this project configuration, we see there are 5 main blocks. If we move to the next slide with the blue, we see that the downstream elements of the ammonia production and air separation stay exactly the same, and the inputs are just slightly tweaked to provide blue hydrogen. It's maybe a familiar process to many people that are watching today, but we see this as something that's ties in well with our modularity and building block approach to provide quick project developments. We can go to the next slide. So the application of these different configurations, we are targeting mainly offshore green, nearshore developments, and offshore blue. We see that there are many benefits to all of these, the offshore green being the most challenging, both technically and I guess commercially for the time being. But that kind of ties in with all of the green ammonia developments, as was commented on at the start of today's meeting. So the target is to send the molecules to shore instead of electrons, which will free up the grid capacity in many of the nations which are rich in renewable power. And this is something that we're also working on for our offshore hydrocarbon developments to provide power to platform from the wind. So there are many synergies and lessons learned that we can adapt and bring to this offshore project. And the nearshore is again, just to quickly into this nearshore, we can kind of tie into stranded renewable or gas sources and provide immediate infrastructure for areas that can be developed. So very similar to this FSRU concept that we talked about before. And then the offshore is where we can potentially have associated gas streams, so we can improve the carbon efficiency of ongoing gas projects or oil and gas projects where there are abundances of gas which are tricky to handle and somewhat hindering the process. So we can have a clean product by reforming the gas to hydrogen, as shown on the previous slide, and turning that into ammonia, which can then be exported with a very low carbon footprint. Going to the next slide, we have a quick update on the project offset, which is the main invite was for today. We're working with a development partner called Switch2, who are based in the Netherlands, and we are completed the AIP, which is been done by DNV. We worked with ThyssenKrupp and a company called SHIP, who are working on the direct seawater electrolysis application here. The initial AIP was produced for 200 megawatts of electrolysis capacity. And through this project, there are some unique elements that have been considered, and we have actually completed tank testing at Maren facility in the Netherlands to give us an insight on the topside motions that will occur, and also the potential for power production from wave energy in the North Sea sector. And we are working on ongoing safety studies. We've completed a couple of workshops for the hazard identification of this process in the last year. And if we go to the next slide. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. Then this is the ongoing work that we are doing. So we formed the project consortium for project offset. This has received funding from RVO. There are a few unique elements here where we are looking also not only at the base case with commercial products which can be used on board the producer, but also investigating other areas such as the wave power generation that we talked about, utilizing oscillating water columns. Also direct seawater electrolysis, which aims to remove one of the steps for water purification before going into the hydrogen electrolyzers, and also working with Strom on a hydrogen riser development, using a composite material for that transfer. So this is the picture on the right-hand side of an ongoing safety study, where we have modeled out everything, and we will use that model for conducting a fire and explosion risk analysis, and also a dispersion analysis to understand the impact of any leaks or failure mechanisms that may take place on board the vessel. I think the first step for us is to ensure that a safe ship can be designed. We're also working on the development of the hull to incorporate this water columns if possible.
Craig, I hate to interrupt, but we're running a little short on time, so I don't know how much more you have, but we need to.
I'll go very quickly. Yeah, we have working towards technical maturity, and the simple point of the message is that we are looking for power purchase agreements and offtake agreements in the appropriate regions, and we target to be ready by 2025 to make that decision should the right project be available. And then the next slide is should be a overview of the vessel itself. If we can go to the next one. Yeah, so we're looking now, instead of 200, we've increased our capacity to 300, and we'll constantly look at optimizing that arrangement better. We're producing about 800 tons per day, onboarding power through a high voltage swivel. And we can go to the next slide. Yeah, going forward, we see the energy transition to push the need for green ammonia. We see that floating solutions can provide a one-stop shop for the improvement of the supply chain, bringing together elements of the ammonia production and export facilities all in one project. And through the collaboration with the group, we see that we are well situated to offer this. So yeah, going forward, I think it's hopefully going to be a bright future for all of us. We're also situated at the Gas Tech conference now, so anyone who's dialing in, please feel free to go and see my colleagues there, and they can answer any questions which I've not been able to cover here.
That's great. Thank you very much, Craig. A connection to the real world, that would be an excellent outcome. So thank you for that presentation, and a lot of new information for us, not just about the project included in the mapping, but about related concepts, which I think is very interesting to hear. We're going to move along now. We are a little short on time. We're going to stay in the ammonia space, however, and Anna referred earlier to an increasing amount of international collaboration, and we're going to ask Ashwani Dudeja, who's Group President and Director of International Business at ACME Clean Tech Solutions, to talk a little bit about a feasibility study that they are developing. Ashwani, can I hand over to you?
Yeah, thank you, Jesse. Can we have the presentation? Yeah, thank you. I'll try to be quick. So just a quick bit of introduction on next slide. We are, like most renewable companies, a couple of decades old organizations, so fairly young. Can we move to the next one? We are one of the largest renewable players in India, close to 5 gigawatt of operating assets in India on renewable side, which is roughly 65% of the peak Singapore demand from where I'm dialing in. And Craig, I will take your offer and visit your booth in Gas Tech later this afternoon or tomorrow. So we have been a pioneer in India in developing some of the most competitive solutions. Our first product, which was a patented product by our founding chairman, was responsible for bringing down the cost of mobile telephony in India by more than 30%. and it was a power management product for the cellular towers across the country. We were also one of the lowest cost power producers in a bid which was conducted by the government of India, which still is a record of 2.4 cents per kilowatt hour. And we are perhaps the world's first green ammonia producer on a small scale. I have a very small video which I'll request Anna to play on the next slide.
Welcome to the world's first green hydrogen and green ammonia plant. The plant is located in Bikaner in Rajasthan, India. Here, renewable power generated from solar PV plants is used to produce green hydrogen. The nitrogen is captured from atmosphere. Green hydrogen is produced by splitting purified water molecules into oxygen and hydrogen without using fossil fuels, using an electrolyzer. This technique is very clean and produces more than 99.999% pure hydrogen gas. The air available in the atmosphere is pressurized through the air compressor and being buffered by the filter and air dryer. This process produces 99.5% nitrogen. The green hydrogen and nitrogen are mixed and preheated up to 200 degrees Celsius. The product stream then enters into ammonia synthesis converter. Then it's further heated to 360 degrees Celsius. The final product is ammonia. The produced liquid green ammonia is stored in the pressurized vessel, which can be transported to anywhere in the world. By using world-class technology, the process is 100% emissionless. ACME, leading through innovation.
Okay, so this was a 5 tons per day facility which we developed back in 2021 and has been a very attractive tourist and educational destination. There have been more than 35 delegations, out of which 15 were the country delegations who have visited this plant. It's running now for more than 18 months in continuity, and the ammonia which we produce is sold as gray because at the moment there is no market for green ammonia. But that has given us a lot of confidence to develop a much larger facility which is coming up in Oman. It's a 0.9 million tons facility on a 92 square kilometer parcel of land, which has been allocated to us by the government of Oman. And the first phase of this project, which is 100 KTPA, is already under construction. We have done the financial closure, and we were perhaps the first one in the world to be awarded a TUV certificate for complying with the RED 2, RED 3 norms. And we also are perhaps one of the first in the world to have signed a long-term bankable agreement for 100% offtake from our first phase with Yara. On the next slide, there are some of the first which I mentioned, the TUV certificate and the document, the actual work which is happening at the site. Can you move on to the next one? So this is not the only project we are developing. We are developing a pipeline of projects in various places across the world. 2 of them are coming up in India, are moving very fast. We have announced a land agreement in the state of Texas in US, where we are developing about 1.1 million tons project, and we also have an MOU in Egypt in the Suez Canal Authority area for about 2.1 million tons facility. So we aim to develop about 10 million tons of ammonia facilities across the world by 2032. Let's move on to the next one. This is my last slide, and I'll try to make up for some time. So the most critical part right now as a green project developer is, the competition between green and blue. So while Greg mentioned both the technologies for us, and they are probably technology agnostic, for us, it makes we are only focusing on green. We do not have a lot of expertise as well as the resources which are required to develop a blue project. But we do have a view that if we don't have clear regulations or timelines for transition from blue to green, then the aspirations of bringing down the cost of green is never going to happen. And that's what we keep on challenging the various regulatory bodies across the world. But there is another part of regulations which is very challenging, and that's certifications and non-uniformity across the world. So if we have to develop a global supply chain based on green ammonia, we do need to have a uniform set of standards which have to be followed for such projects. The second second challenge is, of course, on the project execution side. Now, if we look at the individual components, 50% of the project cost-wise is roughly the renewable power, 25% is ammonia, and both of these are fairly matured technologies. But what is new is the balanced 25% electrolyzers, and that's something which we have taken a lot of learning from our small-scale project, which is already running in India for more than 18 months now. The next one is commercial challenge, which is very important, and particularly for the shipping industry, the alternative fuel is not ammonia. The alternative fuel is HFO, and the price of HFO is varying from one day to another day based on the oil prices. Now, that's not the case in case of green ammonia. It is the cost of product, 90% of the product cost is actually coming from the capex. And typically, if you look at the power purchase agreement globally, they are fixed price 25, 30 years power purchase agreements, and something which most of the lenders expect green ammonia projects to follow. But then there are not enough buyers in the market who are willing to pay a fixed price for 25 years. So that's another bit of challenge, and it's kind of a circular loop between trying to balance between the requirements of lenders on one hand and the requirements of the buyers and end users on the other. And last but not the least is the end use challenge. So of course, there are existing ammonia users in agriculture, fertilizer, and chemical industry. But marine, which interestingly contributes to nearly 1 gigaton or more than that carbon emissions, which, by the way, is more than the combined emissions from UK and Spain, or more than the emissions which Germany produces, is a significant market potential for ammonia usage. And project developers like us are banking a lot on the marine sector to come forward and make some commitments, which will go a long way in developing these projects on a commercial scale. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashwani. That was really interesting. And I've written down my 8 questions I'd like to ask you. I hope we have time for at least one of them later. But really, I think ACME's story kind of illustrates why we're interested in pilot and demonstration projects in this space, right? You've taken that step. You've demonstrated the benefits of doing something at pilot scale, the learnings that can be applied to larger scale activities, and I think that your story, while you guys are one of the first out, is not uncommon on the production side, and it gives us at the GMF real hope about the future availability and even cost of these shipping fuels. So we'll come back hopefully to some questions at the end, but thank you very much for sharing. I'd like to shift gears now away from ammonia. We'll start to look at the methanol fuel pathway. I'd like to hand over to Bengt Ramne, who's Managing Director and a naval architect at ScandiNAOS, and you're going to be talking about a methanol dual fuel conversion kit that you've been developing. Bengt?
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. Can you hear me and can you see my PowerPoint?
Looking good.
Oh, thank you. Okay, thanks again. So I will talk about this methanol dual fuel conversion kit that we have developed, and I will tell you a little bit more about our background in methanol. So I'm a naval architect, managing director of ScandiNAOS, and ScandiNAOS is a naval architecture company. Trying to shift to the next slide. It's not successful. Like this, right? We are based in Sweden, Gothenburg, and we have some presence in the Europe, in Spain, Italy, and Croatia. Started off as being naval architects, doing typical things that naval architects do: ship design, integration of different systems. But we always had a passion or a drive to improve things and see how shipping can be done in a better way. And we had some projects where we, in 2009, actually, we started to look into projects for generally us to improve or reduce the environmental and climate impact from shipping. And there we sort of looked very widely at what we could do, put sail on the ships, waste heat recovery, exhaust gas cleaning, but it was very clear that the fuel is the key thing. And we made a quite broad look what alternative fuel we could find at the time in 2009. And we saw that methanol could be a possibility. There was a lot of interesting things at the time. No one had thought about methanol being used as a fuel in marine shipping. So that actually is something we brought up. And it's very nice now to see that we have reached a commercial stage. Anyway, why we like methanol so much is because it's clean burning. We have no sulfur and no particles, and we lower the emissions from nitrogen. And very important, that is one of the fuels that has the best potential for being produced from renewable feedstock in large quantities. For shipping, we also see it beneficial that if we would have a spill, it's much less of a issue compared to oil fuels because it's biodegradable and it dilutes in water. So that's an aspect that's very relevant for shipping. And for shipping also, we see that in order to have enough volume or energy to bring, we need to have a liquid fuel. You can make the gas liquid by cooling it, but we see that the methanol has some benefit by being in a normal temperature and pressure, being liquid, easy to handle. And actually, what we find out, it's really good engine fuel for combustion engines, and that has been explored to some extent, but not that widely. So what our background in methanol and shipping, in 2009 we had this F-ship project together with Stena, Wärtsilä, Lloyds, and that really took tractions, and we got the opportunity to test some things, do some demonstration projects with Stena, and we also inspired Methanex to push MAN to get the engines to get their two-stroke engines to operate on, develop them for methanol operation. So in 2015 we sort of achieved what our first step, being naval architects. We have been the system integrators, and we have pushed so there was available engines for medium speed and slow speed for large applications, and we have been also pushing the rules so we could have a set of rules. We then moved into the next phase to look for the smaller applications like pilot boats, work boats. The challenge there was to find anyone to provide an engine for us, and actually there's no one was standing up. And it's in our DNA to do whatever it takes to move things forward. So we took on the challenge and said, if no one else is going to deliver or develop a methanol engine, we're going to do it. So then we have spent a number of years to develop this methanol engine. It's the only high-speed methanol engine available in the world. We have it for land application and marine applications. It's based on Scania engine, and it's a single-fuel methanol engine. The inherent characteristics of methanol is not really a good diesel fuel, but we like the diesel concept of engines because it provides good high efficiency and good, particularly in part load, and very good load response. So in order to make the methanol work in a diesel engine, we can do that by adding ignition enhancer. So we have a single fuel methanol engine with 3% ignition enhancers that provides really good performance for us. We tested this in a number of projects. This is a Swedish pilot boat in the fast water project, and we just the replaced engine is quite easy, but we also have challenges with the methanol being a low flash point fuel. So we have to make some relevant or take some measures for the ship. The rules that were developed for larger ships not necessarily work that well for smaller vessels, so it's a lot of risk assessment and hazards in order to reach a good design for a smaller vessel. Typical things we have double wall piping. All the fuels are always contained in double boundaries, and we have detections of methanol. And there is also certain other characteristics for how methanol burns and how you can suppress it. So that's something we have to take into consideration. But that's sort of part of the work for the ship design. But what we have now, we are then been able to do this since we have the background as naval architects and now also have the engine development part. So, but this single fuel engine is really good, but it's a little bit limited because we only will work with a Scania brand. We would like to broaden the range, both power-wise and the number of OEMs we could use. So in this combust project that was then financed by the Swedish government through Vinnova, and where we work together with Chalmers University of Technology, Swedish Maritime Administration, and we also have support from the Methanol Institute and Proman. We are developing this dual fuel concept, which we, being not tied to a particular OEM, we intend to do it as a generic design. Dual fuel means that we keep the original diesel system and we add a fuel injector in the inlet manifold, one for each cylinder. So we have a combination of pre-mixed fuel and the diesel fuel. The kit contains of a fuel system, fuel tank, filters and pump, and then we have double wall piping in the engine room, and then we have this kit with the injectors, one for each cylinder, and then we have our engine control unit. Our engine control unit then communicates with the original engine control unit. Maybe a lot of information on this slide, but in principle what it shows that the normal for a diesel engine, you have a maximum torque curve that you can achieve. But when you run it as a propulsion engine, you have a certain propeller torque you need to reach at each speed in order to see the balance. Typically in a diesel engine, all the torque required is provided by diesel. In the dual fuel mode, we will have a base load or base diesel amount in idle with all diesel, but when we speed up, we will have a minimum amount of diesel just for the ignition, and then we will add methanol up to the torque. And we can see that for, let's say for part load, then where you normally would operate, we have quite big methanol part, or let's say diesel substitution. But for the higher power, we still have to rely on diesel. This is a good, well, let's say it's not a problem. We can see that we can take an engine, we don't have to derate it, we can apply it, we can make it run on a good ratio of methanol diesel on its normal conditions, but still have the full power available. So the dotted line is where we have the diesel replacement. We can see for at part load, we have up to 80% diesel replacement. But this is for just converting an existing engine. We could also, the challenge is always to push the diesel replacement to get more methanol, less diesel, and that can be done by cooler combustion air. We can apply EGR, we can derate the engine, or we can lower the compression ratio. So there's a number of things we can do, and we see that this now with the Volvo Penta will run at the end of the year, and we have a number of project in the pipe where we can see that, or within 24 months, we will have the conversion kits for a number of other OEM engines. So we are the methanol pioneers, ScandiNAOS naval architects, and our engineers providing the engines. And I think I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bengt. And just in time, we are at our hour, unfortunately, so we're not going to be able to take any additional questions. As Aaron has indicated in the chat, we will follow up by email wherever we can. I'd just like to thank all our speakers and maybe close with a note about how encouraging I found these examples and presentations. I think as we've worked on this report each year, we've seen this movement that Anna described from conceptual theoretical solutions to solutions that really meet shipping's transition where it's standing. And I think that we saw that today: utilization of existing assets, ability to work with existing technologies, but also the development of commercially specific arrangements that are going to bring these solutions to market. So really warm thanks to all of our presenters today and to everyone who was able to join. We will share the presentations after the meeting, and we will do our best to reach out to any who had questions in the chat that we can follow up on. So thanks very much, everyone, and continued good luck with your work in shipping decarbonization.
Thank you.